Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't the bills we can't pay, but the loneliness we carry home each night. There's a special kind of desperation that settles in when you realize you're drowning, not from one big wave, but from 1,000 small drops of everyday struggle. Jake Morrison sits on a downtown bus bench, watching his breath fog in the cold morning air. He's a single father with calloused hands and an overdue rent notice. Across from him sits Lena Walsh, a widow folding her late husband's hospital bills with trembling fingers. Two strangers. Two people at the end of their rope. Neither planned to speak. But sometimes life's most unexpected answers come from the most impossible places. When Jake looks up and sees something familiar in Lena's tired eyes, he makes a proposition that will change everything. What happens when two broken people decide to build something together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through the thin walls of the studio apartment at 5:30 sharp, just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Jake Morrison's eyes opened before his hand could reach the snooze button, a habit born from necessity, not choice. In the dim light filtering through the single window, he could make out the familiar outline of his 7-year-old son Tommy, curled up in the narrow bed they shared. His small fist clutching a one-armed action figure, Jake sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the mattress springs. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a sink that dripped no matter how many times the landlord promised to fix it. But it was home. Or at least it had been until yesterday's visit from Mrs. Chen, the property manager, who'd handed him the final notice with apologetic eyes and a firm deadline. 30 days. That's all the time he had left. He pulled on his work clothes in the bathroom, jeans worn soft at the knees, a flannel shirt that had seen better years, and steel-toed boots that were resoled twice but still solid. The mirror above the sink reflected a man who looked older than his 34 years, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting at blueprints and worry rather than laughter. His dark hair was already showing grey at the temples, and his hands bore the permanent stains and calluses of someone who worked with them for a living. Tommy stirred as Jake emerged from the bathroom, his sleepy voice cutting through the morning quiet. "Dad, is it school time?" "Not yet, buddy. You've got another hour. Go back to sleep." But Tommy was already sitting up, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. The action figure, Captain Thunder, though he'd lost his left arm in a playground incident last month, fell to the floor with a soft thud.
"Can you fix him today, Dad?"
"You promised." Jake's chest tightened. He'd been promising to fix that toy for weeks. But between his day job at Morrison Construction, no relation. Just a coincidence that still made him smile, and his night shifts at the warehouse security company. There never seemed to be enough hours. "I'll try, Tommy. Maybe this weekend." The boy's face fell slightly, but he nodded with the resigned acceptance of a child who'd learned not to expect too much. It was a look that broke Jake's heart every time he saw it. Tommy had learned to be patient, to be understanding, to ask for less than other kids. At 7 years old, he shouldn't have had to learn those lessons. Jake made breakfast from what they had left, instant oatmeal with a splash of milk that was a day past its expiration date, but still smelled fine. He added a spoonful of peanut butter for protein, and to make it taste like something special. Tommy ate without complaint, swinging his legs from the chair that was too tall for him, chattering about a spelling test and a field trip to the Science Museum that required a permission slip and a $20 fee. $20. Jake made a mental note to check the coffee can where he kept their emergency money. There might be enough if he skipped lunch for the rest of the week. As Tommy got ready for school, Jake looked around the apartment that had been their sanctuary for 3 years. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The walls were decorated with Tommy's artwork and school photos, creating a gallery of growing up that told the story of a boy learning to navigate the world with only his father as a guide. There was the Mother's Day card Tommy had made in kindergarten, awkwardly addressed to Dad, because he didn't have anyone else to give it to. There was the certificate from his first-grade reading achievement, hung with the same pride as if it were a Nobel Prize. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now. Just walked out one morning when Tommy was 4, leaving behind only a note that said she couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. No forwarding address, no phone number, no explanation beyond those crushing words. Jake had spent months wondering what he could have done differently, but eventually he'd realized that some people weren't built for the long haul of raising a family. Sarah was a dreamer who'd thought marriage and motherhood would be different than the daily reality of diapers and sleepless nights and bills that kept coming whether you were ready for them or not. He'd stopped blaming her mostly, but he'd never stopped feeling like he was failing Tommy by not being enough, not being the mother his son had lost, not being the provider who could give him everything he deserved. Jake walked Tommy to the bus stop, a ritual that was one of the few constants in their ever-changing world. The boy's backpack was patched with duct tape, but clean. His clothes were from the thrift store, but neatly pressed. Jake made sure Tommy always looked cared for, even when everything else was falling apart. Have a good day at school, buddy. Remember, Mrs. Patterson will pick you up after and take you to her house until I get home from work. Mrs. Patterson was their neighbor, a retired teacher who watched Tommy in the afternoons for $20 a week. Money Jake could barely spare, but couldn't afford not to spend. She was kind and patient, but she wasn't family. Tommy needed more than a series of temporary caretakers and babysitters. He needed stability, consistency, a real home. As the school bus pulled away with Tommy's face pressed to the window, waving goodbye, Jake felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had 8 hours to figure out how to make $37.50 stretch until Friday. 8 hours to somehow find a solution to their housing crisis. 8 hours to be the kind of father Tommy deserved. Across town, in a 2-bedroom apartment that felt too big and too empty, Lena Walsh sat at her kitchen table surrounded by paperwork that told the story of a life interrupted. Medical bills, insurance statements, final notices and sympathy cards created a landscape of loss that she navigated every morning. With the methodical precision of someone who had learned that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford, David had been gone for 8 months, 2 weeks and 3 days. Not that she was counting, she was counting. The coffee in her mug had gone cold while she worked through the stack of bills, using a calculator that was older than her marriage had been, and a spreadsheet system she'd developed during her years as a bookkeeper. Numbers didn't lie or leave or break your heart. They just existed, waiting for you to add them up and find a solution. The life insurance payout was supposed to solve everything. That's what the agent had told her when she'd signed the papers. But what he hadn't mentioned was that insurance companies had their own timeline, their own investigations, their own reasons for delaying payments. 8 months later, she was still waiting for a check that might or might not come, while the bills kept arriving with the reliability of sunrise. Lena had been good with money during her marriage. She'd managed their household budget, planned for retirement, even built up a small emergency fund. But no amount of careful planning could prepare you for the financial avalanche that came with a 2-year battle against cancer. The experimental treatments not covered by insurance, the time off work to drive to appointments and hold hands in waiting rooms, the medications that cost more than most people's rent. She'd sold her car, taken a loan against David's life insurance policy, borrowed money from her sister Beth in Oregon. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The apartment was filled with the remnants of a shared life that now felt like artifacts from someone else's story. David's coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, along with his reading glasses and the mystery novels he'd never gotten to finish. His clothes hung in the closet like ghosts, still carrying the faint scent of the cologne he'd worn on their first date 12 years ago. Lena was 31 years old, a widow with a degree in accounting and a work history that had been interrupted by caregiving. She was smart, capable, and slowly going under despite her best efforts to stay afloat. The apartment lease was up for renewal next month, and even if she could find the deposit money for a smaller place, She didn't have references or the kind of steady employment that landlords wanted to see. She'd applied for 17 jobs in the past month. 3 had called her back. None had led to offers. The economy was tight, and employers could afford to be choosy. They wanted someone without gaps in their resume, someone who hadn't spent the last 2 years focused on doctor's appointments and insurance claims rather than professional development. The phone rang, interrupting her calculations. It was Beth, calling from Portland with her weekly check-in, that managed to be both supportive and subtly critical at the same time. "How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm fine." It was the automatic response, the one that required no explanation or follow-up questions. "Lena, you know you can always come stay with us. Mark and I have talked about it, and we'd love to have you. Their kids would love having their aunt around more." Beth meant well. She and her husband Mark had a nice life in Oregon. Suburban house, steady jobs, 2 teenagers who were busy with school and sports, and the kind of normal family chaos that Lena had once thought she'd have. But moving to Portland would mean starting over completely, becoming the grateful sister-in-law who lived in the guest room and tried not to be a burden. "I appreciate that, Beth. I really do. But I'm not ready to give up yet." "Give up on what?" "There's nothing keeping you there anymore. Nothing except the faint hope that David's insurance would come through. Nothing except the last place they'd been happy together. Nothing except the stubborn belief that she could figure this out on her own, if she just worked hard enough and smart enough." After she hung up, Lena sat in the silence of the apartment and tried to imagine a future that looked different from the present. She was resourceful. She'd managed to stretch their savings for 8 months longer than anyone would have thought possible. She was hard-working. Even during David's illness, she'd kept their household running and their bills organized. She was resilient. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine and was still standing. But standing wasn't the same as thriving. And lately, it felt like she was holding her breath underwater, waiting for something to change before her lungs gave out. She gathered the bills into neat stacks and put them in the folder she'd labeled Current Crisis. David would have laughed at her organizational system, but it helped her feel like she had some control over the chaos. Then she put on her winter coat and headed for the bus stop, carrying with her the day's mission, another round of job applications, another attempt to convince someone that she was worth taking a chance on. The bus stop was at the corner of 5th and Madison, a busy intersection where 3 different routes converged. It was usually crowded in the morning with commuters and students and people like her, people who didn't have cars or couldn't afford the gas and parking that came with downtown employment. She sat on the bench and pulled out her phone to check the bus schedule, trying to calculate which route would get her to the employment office most efficiently. That's when she noticed the man sitting on the other end of the bench, holding what looked like an eviction notice in his work-roughened hands. He was probably in his 30s, with the kind of solid build that came from physical labor rather than gym memberships. His clothes were clean but worn, and he had the focused expression of someone trying to solve a problem that didn't have an easy answer. There was something about the set of his shoulders, tired but not defeated, that reminded her of David during the hardest parts of his illness. Lena looked away, not wanting to intrude on a stranger's private moment of crisis. But she couldn't help noticing that they were both sitting there at 8 in the morning, both holding pieces of paper that represented some kind of ending, both waiting for a bus that would take them somewhere they hoped might offer a solution. Sometimes life's most important moments happened in the spaces between destinations, in the quiet acknowledgement that other people were fighting their own battles with the same quiet determination you brought to your own. Neither of them spoke, but there was something comforting about sharing the bench with someone who understood that morning was just another word for starting over, one more time. With whatever strength you had left, the silence stretched between them for nearly 10 minutes before Jake Morrison cleared his throat and glanced toward the woman at the other end of the bench. She was carefully folding and unfolding what looked like hospital bills, her movements precise, despite the slight tremor in her hands. Something about her quiet composure reminded him of his mother, who had faced their family's eviction when he was 12, with the same dignified determination. "Bus running late today," he said, his voice rough from the morning cold. Lena Walsh looked up, startled from her concentration. Up close, her eyes were the color of coffee with cream, tired but intelligent. "Yes, it seems to be. The 7:15 is usually reliable. You take this route often." "Most mornings lately." She paused, then added with a rueful smile, "Job hunting has become my full-time occupation." Jake nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. "Construction work for me. Though these days, steady work is harder to come by than it used to be." They fell back into comfortable silence, two strangers who recognized something familiar in each other's struggle. Jake found himself stealing glances at her hands. No wedding ring, but there was a pale band of skin where one had been recently. In her lap, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, he could see the glint of gold. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "About your husband." Lena's breath caught, and she looked down at the tissue-wrapped ring. "It's that obvious. Lost my dad when I was 15. Recognized the look of someone carrying that kind of weight." She was quiet for a long moment, then said, 8 months ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. That's a hard road. The hardest part is what comes after. Everyone expects you to move on, but they don't realize that grief isn't the only thing that doesn't end. The bills keep coming. The world keeps demanding you figure out how to live in it. Jake shifted slightly on the bench, his own eviction notice crinkling in his jacket pocket. "You got kids?" "No. David and I kept saying we'd wait until we were more settled, more financially secure." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out there's no such thing as secure enough. I've got a 7-year-old son, Tommy. His mom left when he was 4, so it's just been us for a while now. That must be difficult. Raising a child alone. Some days are harder than others. But he's a good kid. Tough, like kids have to be when life doesn't give them many choices." The bus rounded the corner, its brakes hissing as it approached their stop. But neither of them moved to stand. There was something about this conversation, this moment of honest recognition between strangers, that felt too important to interrupt. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said, his voice careful. "And feel free to tell me it's none of my business." Lena nodded. "What you said about the bills still coming. Are you in trouble?" "Real trouble?" Her laugh was shaky this time. "Is there any other kind? I've got 30 days before my lease is up, and I can't afford to renew it. Can't afford to move either. The security deposits alone would take money I don't have." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but thoughtful. "I might have an idea. It's going to sound crazy, and you'll probably think I'm out of my mind, but hear me out." The bus pulled away without them, and Lena turned to face him fully for the first time. "I'm listening. I need help with Tommy, not just babysitting, real help. Someone who can be there when he gets home from school, help with homework, make sure he eats something more substantial than cereal for dinner. Someone who can give him the kind of stability I can't provide, working 2 jobs. And I need a place to live," Lena said slowly, beginning to see where this was going. "Right, but here's the thing, I can't afford to pay someone what that kind of help is worth. And you can't afford a place to live on whatever part-time work you might find." Jake took a breath, feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff. "What if we helped each other? I mean, really helped each other. Legal and official." Lena's eyebrows rose. "Legal and official how?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Lena stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "Before you say anything," Jake continued quickly, "I know how it sounds, but think about it practically. You need housing, I need help with Tommy. You're obviously smart with money. I saw you working on those spreadsheets. I'm reliable, I work hard, and I can provide a stable home. We'd both be getting something we need. You're talking about a business arrangement. I'm talking about survival. For both of us." Lena shook her head slowly. "You don't even know me." "I could be anyone. I could be crazy or dangerous, or you're sitting here at 8 in the morning with hospital bills and eviction worries, trying to figure out how to rebuild your life after losing the person you loved most. You're organized enough to have a filing system for your bills, and considerate enough to wrap your wedding ring in tissue paper before you sell it. You asked about my son like you actually cared about the answer. Jake paused. I've known people for years who've shown me less character than you've shown in 10 minutes. A city bus passed them, and then another. The morning was getting later, and they were both going to be late for whatever appointments they'd planned. But neither moved. What exactly are you proposing? Lena asked carefully. A courthouse wedding. Simple, legal, official. You move into my apartment. It's small, but there's a pull-out couch in the living room. You help with Tommy and the household. I provide housing and split my income with you. We file taxes jointly. You get on my health insurance through work. We both get a fresh start. And when one of us wants out, then we get divorced. Clean and simple. We're both adults. We can handle this like adults. Lena was quiet for a long time, staring at the ring in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. David and I were married for 8 years. We planned everything, the house, the kids we'd have, the retirement trips we'd take, all of it built on love and hope and the belief that if we were careful enough, we could control how our story would end. She looked up at Jake. But life doesn't care about your plans, does it? It just keeps happening, whether you're ready or not. No, it doesn't, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. You're talking about marrying a complete stranger. I'm talking about two people who understand that sometimes the most honest relationships are the ones that start with clear expectations. Instead of impossible promises, Lena stood up, pacing a few steps away from the bench, then back. This is insane. Yeah, it is. I don't know anything about taking care of children. Tommy's easy, and you'd figure it out. You're obviously good at figuring things out. What if your son doesn't like me? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But kids are good judges of character. And you've got a kind face. She sat back down, closer to him this time. What if we can't stand each other? Then we'll have learned something about ourselves, and we'll go our separate ways. But right now, we're both drowning separately. Maybe we could stay afloat together. Lena pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at her sister's number. My sister Beth is going to think I've lost my mind. Are you going to call her? No, she's been telling me to give up and move to Oregon for months. If I'm going to make a crazy decision, I'd rather it be my own crazy decision. Jake reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card from his construction job. On the back, he wrote his cell phone number and home address. Think about it. No pressure. But if you want to meet Tommy and see the apartment, we could do that. Low stakes. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Lena took the card, studying it like it contained the answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. Jake Morrison, Lena Walsh. If we did this, and I'm not saying we're doing this, but if we did, what would we tell people? The truth. That we met, we got to know each other, and we decided we could build something together. It's not anybody's business how fast or slow that happened. And Tommy, we tell him that sometimes grown-ups find each other when they need help, and that families don't always look the way they do in storybooks. Another bus approached, and this time they both stood. But before boarding, Lena turned to Jake one more time. This is either the smartest thing I've ever considered or the most foolish. Maybe both. Sometimes the smartest thing feels foolish because it's not what you planned. As the bus doors opened, Lena made a decision. I'll call you tonight, after I've had time to think. Fair enough. They rode the bus in silence, sitting near each other but not together, each lost in thoughts about a conversation that might have just changed everything. When Lena's stop came, she stood to leave, then turned back. Jake, for what it's worth, you seem like a good father. For what it's worth, he replied. You seem like someone worth taking a chance on. The doors closed between them. But through the window, Jake saw her smile for the first time that morning. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. And for the first time in months, he felt something that might have been hope. Jake spent the rest of his workday replaying the conversation at the bus stop, his hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of measuring, cutting and hammering, while his mind wrestled with what he'd proposed. By lunchtime, he'd convinced himself he was either brilliant or completely insane. By quitting time, he was leaning toward insane. The apartment felt smaller when he walked in that evening. Tommy's school papers scattered across the narrow kitchen table alongside past-due bills and the eviction notice that had started it all. Mrs. Patterson had left a note saying Tommy had been quiet and well-behaved, which usually meant he was worrying about something he didn't know how to express. "Hey, buddy," Jake called out as he hung his work jacket on the back of the kitchen chair. "How was school?" Tommy emerged from the bathroom, his face freshly washed, but his hair still sticking up in the back. In his hand was the broken action figure, Captain Thunder's missing arm, making him look more vulnerable than heroic. "Mrs. Henderson gave us our report cards today," Tommy said, holding out a folded paper with the careful solemnity of someone delivering important news. Jake's heart sank as he read the grades. Math C-, Reading D+, Science C. The teacher's comments were diplomatically worded but clear. Tommy was having trouble concentrating, missing assignments, and seemed distracted during class time. "Am I in trouble?" Tommy asked, his voice small. Jake sat down on the edge of the bed so he could be at eye level with his son. "No, buddy, you're not in trouble. But we need to talk about what's going on at school. I try to pay attention, but sometimes I think about other stuff." "What kind of other stuff?" Tommy fidgeted with the broken toy, his 7-year-old vocabulary struggling to articulate worries that would challenge an adult. "Like what happens if we have to move again? And if you'll still be able to pick me up from school if we live somewhere far away? And if Mrs. Patterson will still watch me if we don't live next door anymore?" Jake felt his chest tighten. Tommy had lived through enough upheaval for one childhood. His mother leaving, 2 previous moves when Jake couldn't make rent, the constant shuffle of babysitters and after-school arrangements. The instability that Jake thought he'd been hiding had become Tommy's normal, and it was affecting everything from his grades to his sleep. "What if I told you that we might not have to move after all?" Jake said carefully. "That I might have found a way for us to stay somewhere nice and safe, where you wouldn't have to worry about any of that anymore." Tommy's eyes brightened with the quick hope of childhood, but Jake could see the wariness underneath. "Really? How?" This was the conversation Jake had been dreading. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you're considering a marriage of convenience with a stranger? How do you make that sound normal and safe and like the kind of decision a responsible parent makes? "I met someone today, a lady who's also having some troubles and needs help, just like we do. Her name is Lena, and she's very nice. Smart, too. She's good with numbers and organizing things, like Mommy was." Jake's breath caught. Tommy rarely mentioned Sarah anymore, but when he did, it was usually in the context of comparing new people to the mother who had left him behind. "Different from Mommy, but kind, like how you are kind. Is she going to live with us?" "Maybe. Would that be okay with you?" Tommy considered this with the seriousness he brought to all major life decisions. "Would she help fix Captain Thunder?" "I think she might. She seems like the kind of person who's good at fixing things. And she won't leave like Mommy did?" This was the question Jake had been dreading most. How could he promise Tommy stability when the whole arrangement was built on uncertainty? "Tommy, sometimes grown-ups make promises they can't keep, and that's not fair to kids. I can't promise that Lena will stay forever, because nobody knows what forever looks like. But I can promise that if she comes to live with us, it will be because she wants to help take care of you. And she won't leave unless something really important changes." Tommy nodded slowly, turning this over in his mind. "Can I meet her?" "If you want to. But only if you want to. I want to." That evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep clutching his broken action figure, Jake sat at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand, staring at the business card Lena had given him. The smart thing would be to forget the whole conversation, find a way to make their current situation work. Avoid the complications that came with involving a stranger in their lives. But the report card was still sitting on the table, along with the eviction notice and a bill from Tommy's dentist that he couldn't afford to pay. The smart thing wasn't working. Maybe it was time to try something different. Across town, Lena was having her own conversation with doubt. She'd spent the afternoon researching Jake Morrison online, using the skills she developed as a bookkeeper to verify that he was who he claimed to be. The public records showed no criminal history, no bankruptcies, no red flags beyond the ordinary financial struggles of a single parent in an expensive city. His social media presence was minimal. A few photos of him and Tommy at construction sites and playgrounds, posts about his son's school achievements. The digital footprint of someone whose life revolved around work and parenthood rather than self-promotion. In every photo, Tommy looked happy and well cared for, a child who was clearly loved even if he wasn't surrounded by material abundance. But research could only tell her so much. The internet couldn't reveal whether Jake Morrison was patient with a child's questions, whether he was the kind of man who kept his promises, whether he understood that trust was something that had to be built carefully over time. Her phone rang at 8:30, startling her from her thoughts. "This is Lena. It's Jake. I hope I'm not calling too late." "No, it's fine. I was hoping you'd call." There was a pause, and she could hear the sounds of a television in the background, volume turned low. "I told Tommy about you tonight," Jake said. "About the possibility of you staying with us. How did he take it?" "Better than I expected. He asked if you could help fix his broken toy." Lena smiled despite her nervousness. "What kind of toy?" "Action figure with a missing arm. I keep promising to fix it, but I'm better with construction tools than tiny plastic parts. I might be able to help with that. I'm good with small repair jobs. He'd like to meet you, if you're still considering this. No pressure, just maybe coffee or lunch somewhere neutral. See how you get along." Lena had been dreading this moment all day, the point where theoretical consideration became real possibility. "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow's Saturday. There's a diner near Tommy's school that he likes. Nothing fancy, just a place where he feels comfortable." "What time?"
10 o'clock?
"That way Tommy gets to sleep in a little, but we're done before his afternoon nap time." 10 o'clock works." Another pause, longer this time. When Jake spoke again, his voice was quieter, more uncertain. "Lena, I want you to know that if you meet us tomorrow and decide this isn't right for you, that's completely okay. No hard feelings, no pressure. Sometimes things sound better in theory than they work in practice. I appreciate that. And Jake, the same goes for you. If you meet me and decide I'm not right for your family, I'll understand. Fair enough. The diner is called Mel's on Birch Street. Do you know it?" "I'll find it. See you tomorrow then." "See you tomorrow." After they hung up, Lena sat in the quiet of her empty apartment and tried to imagine sitting across from a 7-year-old boy who might become her stepson, talking to a man who might become her husband, making decisions that would affect all their futures. It felt surreal and terrifying and strangely hopeful all at once. She pulled out her laptop and opened a new document, then began typing a list of questions she wanted to ask Jake about practical matters, household responsibilities, financial arrangements, expectations for Tommy's care, boundaries around personal space and privacy. If they were going to approach this like a business arrangement, she wanted to make sure all the terms were clear, but as she typed, other questions crept in. Questions that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact that she would be entrusting her future to people she didn't know. What if Tommy hated her? What if she said something wrong or didn't understand the unspoken rules of their relationship? What if Jake was different around his son than he'd been at the bus stop? Less thoughtful, less patient? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? She saved the document and closed the laptop, then went to her bedroom and opened the closet where David's clothes still hung like a museum exhibit from her previous life. Tomorrow, she would meet a man who was offering her a future built on practical need rather than romantic love. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but then again, none of this was the life she'd planned. Maybe that was okay. Maybe the life you planned wasn't always the life you needed. She pulled out her most conservative dress, navy blue, appropriate for a job interview or a first meeting with a potential family. As she hung it on the bedroom door, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked older than her 31 years, worn down by grief and stress and months of fighting to stay afloat. But there was something else in her reflection too, a spark of possibility that hadn't been there. Yesterday, tomorrow, she would find out if Jake. Morrison's proposition was the answer to her prayers or just another complication in an already complicated life. Either way, it was a step forward, and forward was the only direction that mattered now. Mel's Diner had the kind of warm comfort that came from decades of serving coffee to people who needed more than caffeine. They needed a place to sit and think and make decisions that might change their lives. The red vinyl booths had been patched with duct tape, and the laminated menus showed pictures of food that looked better than it probably tasted. But the coffee was strong, and the waitresses called everyone honey. Lena arrived 5 minutes early, her hands shaking slightly as she pushed through the glass door. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a sweater that looked maternal without trying too hard. In her purse was the list of questions she'd prepared, along with Captain Thunder's missing arm, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. She'd found the arm at a toy store downtown, explaining to the puzzled clerk that she needed a replacement part for a specific action figure. It had cost $12 she couldn't afford, but something about Jake's description of Tommy's broken toy had stuck with her. Maybe it was because she understood what it felt like to love something that was damaged beyond easy repair. Jake was already there, sitting in a corner booth with Tommy beside him. The boy was smaller than she'd expected, with his father's dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed older than 7. He was coloring in a children's menu with the careful concentration of someone who stayed inside the lines, because rules made the world feel safer. Lena, Jake stood as she approached, his relief visible. "I'm glad you came. So am I." She slid into the booth across from them, meeting Tommy's curious gaze. "You must be Tommy. Your dad told me you're in 2nd grade." Tommy nodded, but didn't speak, studying her with the wariness of a child who'd learned that new adults in his life might disappear without warning. "I brought you something," Lena said, pulling the wrapped tissue from her purse. "Your dad mentioned that Captain Thunder had an accident." Tommy's eyes widened as he unwrapped the plastic arm. "You found it? How did you find it?" "I asked around until I found someone who knew about action figure parts. Sometimes when things get broken, all the pieces are still out there somewhere. You just have to know where to look." Jake watched as Tommy carefully attached the arm to his action figure, testing the joint to make sure it moved properly. The joy on his son's face was worth more than any background check or reference letter could have been. "Thank you," Tommy said solemnly. "Captain Thunder was sad without his arm. I know how that feels," Lena said. "Sometimes, when we lose important pieces of ourselves, we need other people to help us find them again." The waitress came to take their order. Pancakes for Tommy, coffee and toast for the adults. While they waited for food, Lena found herself relaxing into the easy rhythm of conversation with a child who asked direct questions and expected honest answers. "Are you going to marry my dad?" Tommy asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter while adding syrup to his pancakes. Lena glanced at Jake, who gave her an encouraging nod. "We're thinking about it. But we wanted to meet you first, to see if you'd be okay with that. Why do you want to marry him? Do you love him?" It was the question she'd been dreading, because the honest answer was complicated. "I think your dad is a good man, and he loves you very much. Sometimes grown-ups get married because they love each other, and sometimes they get married because they think they can help each other build a good life together. Which kind would you be?" "The second kind, at least at first. But that doesn't mean it's not important or real." Tommy considered this while chewing his pancakes. "Would you help take care of me?" "If you wanted me to. I'd try to be the kind of grown-up you could count on. Would you leave if I was bad sometimes?" Lena's heart broke a little at the question. "Tommy, all kids are bad sometimes. That's part of learning how to be a person. The grown-ups who are supposed to take care of you don't leave just because you make mistakes. My mom did." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. This was Tommy's conversation, and he deserved to have it on his own terms. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Lena said. "That wasn't fair, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt kids, even when the kids didn't do anything wrong. Are you going to have your own kids and forget about me?" "Oh, honey," Lena reached across the table and touched Tommy's hand gently. If I become part of your family, you wouldn't be something I'd forget about. You'd be my family too. After breakfast, they walked to a nearby park where Tommy could play while the adults talked. He ran ahead to the swings, Captain Thunder clutched in his newly complete hands, leaving Jake and Lena to navigate the more complex negotiations of their potential arrangement. He likes you, Jake said, watching his son demonstrate the action figure's restored mobility to an imaginary audience. He's a remarkable kid. You've done a good job with him. I've done the best I could. But you can see what I mean about him needing more stability than I can provide on my own. They sat on a bench near the playground, close enough to supervise, but far enough away to speak privately. Lena pulled out her list of questions, but Jake spoke first. I want to be clear about what I'm offering and what I'm asking for, he said. The apartment is small, but you'd have your own space. I work construction during the day and security 3 nights a week. Tommy gets out of school at 3:15 and needs someone there until I get home. What about household responsibilities? Whatever arrangement works for both of us. I can cook basic things, but I'm not great at meal planning or grocery shopping. I can clean, but I'm not particularly organized about it, Lena smiled. I'm very organized. Maybe too organized, according to my sister. Tommy has some behavioral issues at school, trouble focusing, anxiety about changes. He might need extra help with homework and structure at home. I can handle that. I was a good student, and I'm patient with kids who are struggling. They discussed finances, with Jake proposing to add Lena to his bank account and health insurance, while she contributed her organizational skills and household management. They talked about boundaries, separate bedrooms, shared common spaces, respect for each other's privacy and personal time. What about dating? Lena asked, consulting her list. If one of us meets someone else? Jake was quiet for a moment. I guess we'd cross that bridge if we came to it. For now, I'm not really thinking about dating. Between work and Tommy, I don't have the energy for romance. And if Tommy gets attached to me, and then we decide this isn't working, that's the risk we'd both be taking. But kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. And if we handle any changes honestly, and with his best interests in mind, he'll be okay. Tommy ran over to them, breathless and pink-cheeked from playing. Can Lena push me on the swings? If she wants to, Jake said. Lena followed Tommy to the swing set, where he chatted about school and his friends and his teacher's new haircut, while she pushed him gently back and forth. There was something soothing about the rhythm of it, the simple pleasure of making a child happy with such a small gesture. Are you going to move in with us? Tommy asked as the swing slowed down. Maybe. Would you like that? I think so. You're nice, and you fix Captain Thunder. And Dad smiles more when you're here. When they returned to the bench, Jake was holding his phone with an expression Lena couldn't read. Everything okay? She asked. My landlord just called. Someone else is interested in the apartment, and he wanted to give me first option to renew the lease at the current rate if I can get him first and last month's rent by Monday. Can you do that? Not alone, but if we pooled our resources, your savings and my next paycheck, we could probably cover it. Lena felt her heart rate increase. That would mean committing to this arrangement before we've had time to really think it through. Yeah, it would. They looked at each other across the space of the bench. Two people who had known each other for less than 24 hours, being asked to make a decision that would affect the rest of their lives. What does your gut tell you? Jake asked. Lena watched Tommy running around the playground, his action figure flying through the air in elaborate battle scenarios. She thought about her empty apartment, her dwindling savings account, her sister's well-meaning pressure to give up and move to Oregon. She thought about the way Jake had listened to Tommy's difficult questions without flinching, the way he'd trusted her enough to share his fears about his son's struggles. My gut tells me that sometimes the most practical decisions are also the most brave ones, she said. Is that a yes? That's a yes. But I want to do this right. I want us to get married at the courthouse, make it legal and official. I want clear agreements about expectations and responsibilities. And I want to tell Tommy the truth about what we're doing and why. Jake extended his hand to her. Partners? Lena shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and the steadiness that spoke of reliability. Partners! Tommy ran back to them one more time, sensing that something important had happened in his absence. Did you decide? We decided, Jake said. Lena is going to come live with us and be part of our family. Tommy threw his arms around Lena's waist with the spontaneous affection of childhood. Can we go home now? I want to show you my room and my books and where we keep the cereal. As they walked back toward the bus stop, Tommy between them, chattering excitedly about all the things he wanted to show Lena. She felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the sense that she was moving towards something rather than just running away from loss. It wasn't the life she'd planned, and it wasn't built on the foundation of romantic love that fairy tales promised. But it was built on something else, mutual respect, practical need, and the shared understanding that sometimes families aren't born, they're chosen. And sometimes the most important promises aren't about forever, but about showing up today and tomorrow and the day after that, building trust one ordinary moment at a time. The courthouse wedding took place on a Tuesday morning in a room that smelled like floor wax and old paper. Lena wore a simple blue dress she'd owned for years, while Jake had borrowed a tie from his co-worker Carlos, who served as their witness along with Beth, who had driven down from Oregon with a mixture of concern and curiosity. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, read the standard vows with the efficiency of someone who'd performed thousands of these brief unions. When she asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Jake and Lena exchanged a look that was equal parts determination and uncertainty before saying, "I do." The kiss was brief and awkward, more like a handshake than a romantic gesture. But when the judge pronounced them married and handed them their certificate, Lena felt a surprising sense of relief. Whatever happened next, she was no longer alone in the world. She had a legal family, a place to belong, a partnership that meant something in the eyes of the law. Tommy had been in school during the ceremony, a decision they'd made to keep things simple and avoid questions he wasn't ready to answer. They would tell him that evening, after Lena had officially moved in, and they could present it as a celebration rather than a source of anxiety. The moving process was surprisingly simple, given how much Lena's life was about to change. She packed her clothes, her few pieces of jewelry, her laptop and important papers into 3 suitcases and 2 boxes. The furniture would go to charity. Jake's apartment was already fully furnished, and there was no room for duplicates. The hardest part was packing David's things. She'd avoided dealing with his belongings for months, but now she had to make decisions about what to keep, what to donate, and what to store, until she had a better sense of how this new life would unfold. She kept his watch, the one she'd given him for their 5th anniversary. She kept the cookbook they'd used together, filled with notes in his handwriting about substitutions and modifications. She kept one of his sweaters, the soft grey one that still smelled faintly like him, folded carefully in tissue paper at the bottom of her suitcase. Everything else went to charity or to Beth, who promised to keep the boxes safe in her garage until Lena was ready to deal with them. "Are you sure about this?" Beth asked as they loaded the last box into her car. "It's not too late to change your mind. You could still come to Oregon with me." "I'm sure," Lena said, though her voice carried more conviction than she felt. "This is what I want to do." "But you don't love him, not yet. But I respect him, and I think he's a good man. And Beth, I need to try something different. I can't keep living in the past." Beth hugged her goodbye with tears in her eyes, making Lena promise to call every week and to ask for help if she needed it. As her sister's car disappeared around the corner, Lena stood on the sidewalk outside Jake's apartment building. With her 3 suitcases and felt the weight of finality settle around her shoulders, the apartment looked different when she walked in as Mrs. Morrison. Instead of as a visitor, Jake had cleared space in the closet and moved his clothes to one side of the dresser. He'd also bought new sheets for the pull-out couch and hung a small mirror near the window where she could do her hair in natural light. "I know it's not much," he said, watching her set down her suitcases. "But we can make it work until we figure out something better." "It's perfect," Lena said, and meant it. The space was small, but clean, organized in the practical way of someone who'd learned to make the most of limited resources. Tommy's artwork covered one wall, creating a gallery of crayon drawings and school certificates that spoke of a childhood surrounded by love, even when it wasn't surrounded by luxury. Tommy burst through the door at 3:30, dropped his backpack with a thud, and stopped short when he saw Lena's suitcases. "Are you moving in today?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "I am," Lena said. "Your dad and I got married this morning, so now we're officially a family." Tommy processed this information with the adaptability of childhood. "Can I see your wedding ring?" Lena held out her hand, showing him the simple gold band they'd bought at a jewelry store near the courthouse. It wasn't expensive or elaborate, but it was real and it meant something. "Dad, where's your ring?" Jake showed Tommy his matching band, and Tommy examined both rings with the serious attention of a quality inspector. "They match," he pronounced, apparently satisfied with this evidence of official family status. "Are we going to have a party?" "We thought we'd order pizza tonight," Jake said. "And maybe watch one of those movies you've been wanting to see. Can Lena pick the movie?" "Sure, if she wants to." Tommy disappeared into the bathroom to wash his hands, leaving Jake and Lena alone to navigate the first awkward moments of their new living arrangement. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked. "Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling." "Yeah, that sounds about right." That evening, as they sat around the small kitchen table sharing pizza and watching Tommy's animated movie on Jake's laptop, Lena began to understand what she'd signed up for. This wasn't a romance or a fairy tale. It was daily life, ordinary and demanding and sometimes chaotic. Tommy spilled orange juice on his shirt and had to change clothes. The pizza was slightly burned on the bottom. The laptop battery died halfway through the movie, and they had to search for the charger under a pile of Tommy's school papers. But there was something comforting about the chaos, something reassuring about being needed for small, practical things. When Tommy asked her to help him brush his teeth because he couldn't reach the toothpaste, when Jake thanked her for washing the dishes while he helped with bedtime stories, when she found herself adjusting Tommy's blankets before turning off his light, these tiny domestic moments felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. 3 weeks into their marriage, they'd established routines that worked for all of them. Lena walked Tommy to the bus stop in the mornings before heading to her part-time job at a small accounting firm downtown. Jake picked Tommy up from school and helped with homework until Lena got home around 5. Evenings were for dinner, family time, and the kind of ordinary conversations that happen around kitchen tables everywhere. Tommy's grades had already started to improve. Having someone there when he got home from school, someone who could help with math problems and listen to him read aloud, made a difference in his confidence and focus. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had called to comment on the positive changes she'd observed. "He seems more settled," she told Jake during their weekly phone check-in. "More secure. Whatever you're doing at home is working." Lena had thrown herself into the household management with the same organizational skills she'd used in her professional life. She'd created a budget that actually balanced, a meal planning system that reduced their grocery costs, and a schedule that ensured Tommy always had clean clothes and completed homework. But more than that, she'd begun to understand Tommy's moods and needs in the way that comes from paying attention to a child every day. She knew he got cranky when he was hungry and worried when changes in routine weren't explained in advance. She knew he liked his sandwiches cut diagonally and his bedtime stories to end with the hero saving the day. Jake watched this developing relationship with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. He'd expected Lena to be competent. Her accounting background had suggested she'd be good with schedules and organization. But he hadn't expected her to be so naturally attuned to Tommy's emotional needs, so patient with his questions, so genuinely interested in his 7-year-old observations about the world. "You're good at this," he told her one evening as they cleaned up after dinner while Tommy played with Captain Thunder in the living room. "Good at what?" "Being a mom." Lena's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. "I don't know if I'm a mom exactly." I'm more like a very invested roommate who cares about Tommy's well-being. That's what being a mom is, most of the time. Caring enough to show up every day and pay attention to what a kid needs. Is that what your mom was like? Jake was quiet for a moment, remembering a woman who'd worked 2 jobs and still found time to help with homework and attend school plays. Yeah, pretty much. She didn't have much to give us materially, but she never let us doubt that we mattered to her. What would she think of this arrangement? I think she'd like you. She always said that love was a choice you made every day, not just a feeling you had. She'd appreciate that you chose to be here for Tommy, even when you didn't have to be. Their neighbors had accepted the sudden marriage with the kind of polite curiosity that apartment building dwellers brought to each other's business. Mrs. Patterson, who still watched Tommy occasionally when both Jake and Lena had to work late, had pronounced Lena a good influence and seemed pleased that Tommy's afternoon routine had become more structured. Carlos, Jake's co-worker and closest friend, had been more skeptical until he'd met Lena and seen how she interacted with Tommy. I thought you were crazy when you first told me about this, he'd admitted, over beers while Lena helped Tommy with a school project. But she's good for both of you. Kid's happier, and you're not carrying all that stress in your shoulders anymore. It was true. Jake had noticed that he slept better now, knowing that Tommy was being cared for by someone who genuinely wanted to be there. The constant low-level anxiety about childcare emergencies and schedule conflicts had eased, replaced by the relief of shared responsibility. But late at night, when Tommy was asleep and he and Lena sat at opposite ends of the couch reading or watching television, Jake sometimes caught himself wondering what it would be like if this were real in the traditional sense. What it would be like to hold her hand or share more than polite conversation about practical matters. Lena was beautiful in a quiet way that he'd begun to appreciate more as he got to know her. She had a way of listening that made people feel heard, a sense of humor that emerged when she felt comfortable, and a competence that made everything in their household run more smoothly. But she was also clearly still grieving her husband, still processing a loss that had changed the fundamental shape of her life. Jake could see it in the way she sometimes stared out the window with a distant expression, in the careful way she folded David's cookbook when she used it, in the fact that she kept her wedding ring from her first marriage in a small jewelry box on the nightstand. They were partners, roommates, co-parents to Tommy. They were building something together that felt increasingly like a real family. But they weren't lovers, and Jake wasn't sure if that would ever change or if it even should change. What they had was working. Tommy was thriving. Their finances were stable, and they'd found a rhythm that felt sustainable. Maybe that was enough. Maybe wanting more was greedy or dangerous to the careful balance they'd created. But sometimes, when Lena laughed at something Tommy said, or when she handed Jake his coffee in the morning with a smile that seemed meant just for him, he wondered if partnership might eventually grow into something deeper. And sometimes, when he caught her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, he wondered if she was thinking the same thing. 3 months into their marriage, Lena woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of Tommy's laughter echoing from the kitchen. She'd grown accustomed to the rhythms of the apartment, Jake's early morning movements as he got ready for work, Tommy's chatter during breakfast, the comfortable sounds of a household coming to life. But this was different. This was the sound of pure joy, the kind of uninhibited happiness that children express when something delights them completely. She pulled on her robe and padded to the kitchen to find Jake and Tommy making pancakes, or at least attempting to. There was flour on every surface, including both of their faces, and Tommy was giggling as Jake tried to flip a pancake that had apparently taken on a life of its own. "Morning," Jake said, turning to smile at her with batter in his hair. "We thought we'd surprise you with breakfast in bed, but it turns out we're better at making messes than pancakes." "I helped," Tommy announced proudly, pointing to a stack of pancakes that were varying shades of brown and distinctly non-circular in shape. "Dad said I could crack the eggs, but one of them had pieces in it." Lena looked around the kitchen, flour handprints on the cabinets, syrup on the counter, eggshells in the sink, and felt something shift in her chest. This was the kind of chaos that came from people who cared about each other, trying to do something nice together. This was what a family kitchen looked like on a Saturday morning. "They look perfect," she said, meaning it. "But next time, maybe call me for backup before you attempt the egg cracking." "Deal," Jake said, handing her a cup of coffee that was exactly the right temperature and sweetness. He'd learned how she liked it without asking, the same way she'd learned that he preferred his toast barely brown, and Tommy liked his orange juice in the blue cup, never the red one. They ate breakfast at the small table, Tommy regaling them with plans for his day that included building a fort, teaching Captain Thunder new battle moves, and possibly learning to fly if he could figure out the right technique. Jake listened with the serious attention he brought to all of Tommy's elaborate schemes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the engineering aspects of fort construction. Watching them together, Lena was struck by how naturally Jake had adapted to single parenthood. He never dismissed Tommy's ideas as silly or age-inappropriate. He never seemed impatient with the repetitive questions or the need to explain things multiple times. He'd created a world where Tommy felt safe to be curious, to dream big, to test boundaries without fearing abandonment. After breakfast, while Jake took Tommy to the playground, Lena tackled the kitchen cleanup and found herself humming for the first time in months. The simple domesticity of washing dishes and wiping counters felt satisfying in a way that surprised her. She'd always been organized and efficient, but she'd never experienced the particular pleasure that came from caring for a space that belonged to people she loved. The thought stopped her mid-wipe. People she loved. When had that happened? She looked around the apartment with new eyes, seeing not just the practical arrangement she'd entered into for mutual survival, but a home she'd helped create. Her coffee mug sat next to Jake's in the dish drainer. Her handwriting was on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. Her book was folded open on the coffee table next to Tommy's homework and Jake's work gloves. These small signs of integration told a story she hadn't expected to write. Somewhere in the daily routine of making lunches and helping with homework and sharing the couch for evening television, she'd stopped being a temporary resident and become part of a family. On the nightstand in her sleeping area, David's photograph looked out at the life she was building without him. For the first few weeks, she'd said goodnight to the picture every evening, a ritual that helped her feel connected to the man she'd lost. But lately, she'd noticed that sometimes she forgot to look at it before falling asleep, caught up instead in plans for the next day or replaying conversations with Tommy and Jake. The guilt that accompanied this realization was familiar, the survivor's burden of moving forward when the person you loved most couldn't. But underneath the guilt was something else, gratitude. David had loved her enough to want her to be happy, even if that happiness had to be found without him. When Jake and Tommy returned from the playground, pink-cheeked and full of stories about Tommy's successful attempt to go across the monkey bars without falling, they found Lena reorganizing the hall closet with the systematic thoroughness that had become her signature approach to household management. "You don't have to do that," Jake said, watching her sort winter coats by size and season. "I know. I want to. It helps me feel useful. You are useful. More than useful. You're—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Essential." The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than the practical arrangement they'd originally negotiated. Essential implied permanence, importance beyond mere convenience. "So are you," Lena said quietly, and they stood there for a moment, both aware that something fundamental had shifted in their understanding of what they meant to each other. Tommy broke the moment by announcing that Captain Thunder needed new adventures and recruiting both adults to help create an elaborate obstacle course using couch cushions and kitchen chairs. They spent the afternoon building and rebuilding the course, cheering as the action figure successfully navigated each challenge. And Lena found herself laughing more than she had since David's death. That evening, after Tommy was in bed, she and Jake sat on the couch with the comfortable distance they'd established, close enough to share the space, far enough apart to maintain appropriate boundaries. But tonight the distance felt less comfortable and more like something they were maintaining, out of habit rather than necessity. "Jake," she said during a commercial break in the movie. They'd been half watching. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you ever miss being married? I mean really married, to someone who chose you for romantic reasons rather than practical ones?" Jake was quiet for so long that Lena wondered if she'd crossed a line. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "Sometimes, especially in the evenings when Tommy's asleep and it's just quiet. I miss having someone to talk to about the day. Someone who was invested in the small details of my life because she cared about me, specifically, not just because we were sharing household responsibilities. Do you ever think about dating, meeting someone?" "Not really. Between work and Tommy and this," he gestured around the apartment, "I don't have the energy for the games that dating requires. And honestly, I'm not sure what I'd be looking for that I don't already have here." Lena understood what he meant. The emotional intimacy that developed from shared daily life was different from romantic passion, but it was real and valuable in its own way. She knew Jake's moods, his habits, his worries about Tommy's future. He knew her organizational quirks, her tendency to overthink decisions, her grief patterns that came in waves rather than straight lines. "What about you?" Jake asked. "Do you miss it?" "I miss feeling chosen," Lena admitted. "I miss feeling like someone's first priority, someone's romantic focus. But I also know that I'm not ready for that kind of vulnerability again. Losing David taught me that love can disappear in ways you never expect, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough to risk that kind of loss again." "What we have doesn't feel risky to you?" Lena considered this. "It feels different. We went into this with clear expectations and practical goals. Nobody promised forever, and nobody's building fantasies about perfect love conquering all obstacles. In some ways that feels more honest than traditional romance, but less exciting, maybe, but also less terrifying." They returned to watching the movie, but the conversation had opened something between them, a recognition that their arrangement, however practical it had started, was becoming something more complex and emotionally significant than either had anticipated. Later that night, as Lena lay on the pull-out couch, listening to the sounds of Jake and Tommy sleeping in the bedroom, she found herself thinking about the different kinds of love that existed in the world. There was passionate romantic love, the kind that inspired poetry and grand gestures and the willingness to rearrange your entire life for another person. There was family love, steady and unconditional, and built on shared history and commitment. But there was also the kind of love that grew from daily kindness, from showing up consistently, from choosing to care for someone's well-being even when you didn't have to. It was quieter than passion and less dramatic than romantic intensity. But it was real and sustaining in ways that surprised her. She wasn't sure what to call what she felt for Jake: respect, affection, gratitude, partnership. But whatever it was growing stronger every day, rooted in the ordinary moments that made up a shared life. And for the first time since David's death, she was beginning to think that maybe different didn't have to mean lesser. Maybe the love you chose was just as valuable as the love you fell into. Maybe what they were building together was exactly what they both needed, even if it wasn't what either of them had originally planned. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in November, mixed in with the usual collection of bills and advertisements that Lena sorted through while her coffee cooled on the kitchen counter. The return address was from Hartwell and Associates, the law firm that had been handling David's estate, and she almost set it aside to read later until she noticed the phrase "settlement disbursement" in the subject line. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the envelope, expecting another update about delays or additional paperwork requirements. Instead, she found herself staring at a letter that would change everything. "Dear Mrs. Walsh," it began, and she had to read the opening paragraph 3 times before the words made sense. The life insurance company had finally resolved their investigation. The claim that had been disputed for months due to a technicality about David's medical history had been approved. The settlement check, in the amount of $250,000, would be deposited into her account within 5 business days. Lena sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the letter still clutched in her hands. $250,000. Enough to pay off every debt she owed. Enough to put a down payment on a house. Enough to support herself independently for years while she figured out what came next. Enough to make her marriage to Jake Morrison completely unnecessary. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 8 months after David's death, she desperately needed this money to survive. She'd made phone calls, filled out forms, provided documentation, and waited with increasing desperation for an insurance company to honor their commitment. When the money failed to come, she'd been forced to make impossible choices, including the decision to marry a stranger for practical reasons. Now, when she'd finally found stability and something that felt like happiness, the financial security she'd originally needed arrived like a gift she no longer knew how to receive. "What's that?" Tommy asked, bouncing into the kitchen with his backpack already on his shoulders and Captain Thunder tucked under one arm. "Just some mail," Lena said, folding the letter and slipping it into her pocket. "Are you ready for school?" "Ready. Mrs. Henderson said we're going to learn about dinosaurs today. Did you know that some dinosaurs were as small as chickens?" Lena walked Tommy to the bus stop as she did every morning, listening to his excited chatter about prehistoric creatures, while her mind raced through the implications of the letter in her pocket. By the time the school bus pulled away, she'd realized that the money created a problem she'd never anticipated: the need to choose between financial independence and the life she'd built with Jake and Tommy. At work, she found it impossible to concentrate on the accounting spreadsheets that usually absorbed her attention completely. Her mind kept returning to the fundamental question that the insurance settlement had created. If she no longer needed Jake's financial support, what reason did she have to stay in a marriage that had started as a business arrangement? The practical answer was simple. She didn't need a reason to stay beyond wanting to. But the emotional reality was more complicated. How could she be sure her feelings for Jake and Tommy were genuine rather than born from gratitude and dependency? How could she know if they cared about her as a person or simply appreciated her usefulness in their daily lives? When she arrived home that afternoon, she found Jake in the kitchen helping Tommy with math homework. Both of them bent over the small table with the intense concentration that second-grade word problems seemed to require. The scene was so familiar, so comfortable, that for a moment she almost convinced herself to put the letter away and pretend it had never arrived. "How was work?" Jake asked, looking up with the smile that had become part of her daily routine. "Fine. How was school, Tommy?" "Good. We did learn about dinosaurs. And I drew a picture of a T-Rex for you." He handed her a crayon drawing that showed a large purple dinosaur with an impressive set of teeth and what appeared to be a very small brain. "It's wonderful. Should we put it on the refrigerator?" "Yes, right next to the one of our family." Lena's chest tightened as she looked at the drawing Tommy had made weeks earlier. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a square house, labeled "Me and Dad and Lena" in his careful second-grade handwriting. On the refrigerator, it looked like the artwork of any normal family, the kind of drawing that proud parents saved in memory, boxes and showed to embarrassed teenagers years later. But what if it was just the fantasy of a 7-year-old who wanted a stable family badly enough to create one out of whatever materials were available? After dinner, while Tommy played in the living room, Lena found herself washing dishes with unusual slowness, trying to find the right words for a conversation she didn't want to have. "Jake," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the bills he'd been sorting, and she saw his expression change as he registered the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" Lena pulled the letter from her pocket and handed it to him without explanation. She watched his face as he read, saw the moment when he understood what it meant, saw the careful mask that replaced his initial surprise. "That's great news," he said, his voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "You must be relieved." "I am. But it also complicates things. How so? Lena sat down across from him, searching his face for clues about what he was thinking. The whole reason I married you was because I needed financial stability. Now I don't need that anymore. So you're leaving. It wasn't a question, and the resignation in his voice cut through her like a blade. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Jake folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. What's to figure out? You came here because you had no other choice. Now you have choices. Lots of them. That's not how I think of it. How do you think of it? Lena struggled to articulate feelings that were still forming, still too new and fragile to examine closely. I think about whether what we've built together is real or just convenient. I think about whether you and Tommy care about me as a person or just appreciate what I do for your household. I think about whether I'm staying because I want to or because I'm afraid to be alone again. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his attention focused on the stack of bills in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was careful and measured. I can't answer those questions for you, Lena, but I can tell you that these past few months have been the most stable and happy that Tommy and I have had since his mother left. I can tell you that I look forward to coming home every day because I know you'll be here. I can tell you that watching you with Tommy has taught me things about parenting that I never figured out on my own. He paused, then looked directly at her. But if you're asking whether I'd try to keep you here out of guilt or obligation, the answer is no. If you want to leave, you should leave. Tommy and I managed before you came, and we'll manage if you go. That's not what I'm asking. Then what are you asking? Lena realized she didn't know. The question behind all her questions was whether Jake could love her for reasons that had nothing to do with practicality. Whether Tommy would still want her in his life if she weren't providing stability and homework help. Whether the family they'd created was strong enough to survive the test of choice rather than necessity. I'm asking if you want me to stay, she said finally. Of course I want you to stay. But wanting isn't enough. You have to want to be here. That night, Lena lay awake on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the apartment settling around her. In the bedroom, she could hear Jake's breathing and Tommy's occasional sleep mumbles. The ordinary sounds of people who belonged together. The money in her bank account, money she'd waited for desperately just a few months earlier, felt less like a gift and more like a test. It gave her the freedom to leave, which meant that staying would be a genuine choice rather than a necessity. But choice required knowing what she wanted, and she wasn't sure she trusted her own feelings enough to make such an important decision. The next morning, she called in sick to work and spent the day walking around the city, trying to imagine her life without Jake and Tommy. She could afford her own apartment now, something nice with good light and space for an office. She could travel, maybe take the European trip she and David had been saving for. She could go back to school, pursue the advanced accounting degree she'd always thought about. All of these possibilities felt abstract and distant, like plans someone else might make for a life she didn't particularly want to live. By evening, she'd made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She came home to find Jake making dinner while Tommy sat at the table working on a school project about family traditions. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so exactly what she'd grown to expect and depend on, that she knew her choice had probably been made weeks ago without her realizing it. I want to use the insurance money to buy us a house, she said, without preamble. Setting down her purse and hanging up her coat, Jake turned from the stove, wooden spoon still in his hand. Us, all three of us. I want to find a place with enough space for Tommy to have his own room, and for me to have an office. I want a kitchen big enough for family dinners and a yard where Tommy can play with Captain Thunder. Lena, I want to invest in this family, Jake. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. I want to stop sleeping on the pull-out couch and start sharing your bedroom like a real married couple. I want to renew our vows and mean them this time. I want to build something permanent with you. Tommy looked up from his project, his eyes bright with excitement. We're going to get a real house? With a yard? If your dad wants to, Lena said, her gaze still fixed on Jake's face. Jake set down the wooden spoon and crossed the kitchen until he was standing close enough to touch her. Are you sure? This isn't just about feeling grateful or guilty about having choices. I'm sure. The money didn't change what I want. It just made me realize that what I want is to be here with both of you, building something that we choose together. Jake reached out and took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her palms. In that case, yes. I want to find us a house. I want to share a bedroom with my wife. I want to give Tommy the stability of a real home. And I want to be the kind of wife you chose because you loved me, not because you needed me. You already are, Jake said, and kissed her for the second time in their marriage. This time, it felt nothing like a handshake. House hunting with a 7-year-old turned out to be an exercise in patience, creativity, and the ability to see potential through the eyes of someone whose primary concerns involved optimal Captain Thunder battle scenarios and the proximity of trees. Suitable for climbing, this one has a good yard for running, Tommy announced after spending 30 seconds in the backyard of their third prospect, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house on the outskirts of town. But there's no place to build a secret fort. Their realtor, Margaret Chen, had initially seemed surprised by their specific requirements, a house that felt like home to people who'd learned to make the most of limited space, with room to grow but not so much space that it felt empty or expensive to maintain. But after spending 2 weekends driving them around neighborhoods, she'd begun to understand the particular dynamics of their family unit. I think you'll like the next one, she said as they climbed back into her sedan. It's been on the market for a while because it needs some updating, but it has character. And there's a big oak tree in the backyard that would be perfect for a treehouse. The house was a 1950s colonial with blue shutters that needed painting and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. But when they walked through the front door, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in any of the previous showings, the sense that she could see their life unfolding in these rooms. The living room was large enough for comfortable furniture and Tommy's elaborate floor-based construction projects. The kitchen had windows that looked out onto the backyard and enough counter space for Lena's organizational systems and cooking experiments. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, one for her and Jake, one for Tommy, and one that could serve as an office and guest room. The master bedroom has a walk-in closet, Margaret pointed out, and the bathroom has been recently updated. But Lena was drawn to the bedroom's large windows that looked out over the oak tree Tommy had already claimed for his future treehouse. She could imagine waking up in this room, sharing morning coffee with Jake while they planned their days, and watched Tommy play in the yard below. What do you think? Jake asked, finding her standing by the window. I think it feels like home, she said. Not perfect, but right. Dad, Lena, come see this. Tommy's voice echoed from the backyard, and they found him standing next to the oak tree with his arms stretched wide, trying to measure its circumference. This tree is perfect for a treehouse, he announced. And look, there's space for a swing over there, and maybe a garden where Lena could grow vegetables like she talks about. Lena looked around the yard, seeing it through Tommy's eyes, not just an empty space, but a canvas for the kind of family life they wanted to create. She could picture summer barbecues, Tommy's birthday parties, quiet evenings sitting on the back porch while he played with neighborhood friends. The asking price is reasonable, Margaret said quietly to Jake and Lena, while Tommy continued his detailed exploration of the yard's potential, especially considering the location and the size of the lot. The sellers are motivated. They've already moved to Florida and just want to close quickly. That evening, they sat around the kitchen table in their small apartment, surrounded by mortgage papers, inspection reports, and the other bureaucratic artifacts of home buying. Tommy had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of imagining tree houses and secret forts, leaving Jake and Lena to navigate the financial complexities of their decision. Are you sure about using so much of the insurance money for the down payment? Jake asked, reviewing the figures for the 3rd time. Once we do this, there's no going back to separate financial lives. I'm sure, Lena said. This is what I want to do with David's insurance money. I want to build something lasting, something that honors what he and I had by helping create something new. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. He would have liked that. He would have liked you, Lena said with certainty. David always said that the most important thing in life was finding people who made you want to be better than you thought you could be. That's what you've done for me. You've done the same for me. And for Tommy. They signed the papers that night, committing to a 30-year mortgage and the kind of shared future that felt both terrifying and inevitable. As Lena wrote her name next to Jake's on document after document, she thought about the different kinds of promises people made to each other, the passionate vows of young lovers, the practical commitments of people who'd learned that love was built as much as felt. The closing was scheduled for December 15th, just 10 days before Christmas. Beth had offered to drive down from Oregon to help with the move, bringing her husband Mark and their teenagers to provide extra hands and moral support. "I still can't believe you're doing this," Beth said during one of their nightly phone calls. 6 months ago you were talking about moving to Portland, and now you're buying a house with a man you married for practical reasons. A lot has changed in 6 months. Do you love him? It was the question Lena had been asking herself as she packed boxes and planned room layouts and imagined their life in the new house. Love felt like too simple a word for the complex mixture of affection, respect, gratitude, and deep partnership that had developed between her and Jake. "I love the life we've built together," she said finally. "I love the way he fathers Tommy, the way he makes me feel like I belong somewhere, the way we work together to solve problems. Whether that's the same as being in love, I don't know. But it feels real and valuable and worth building on. That's very practical of you. I've learned that practical can be romantic too, in its own way." 2 weeks before the closing, Jake surprised her by suggesting they renew their vows in a small ceremony at the new house, with their friends and the few family members who mattered to them as witnesses. "I want Tommy to see us making real promises to each other," he explained. "I want him to understand that we're choosing to be a family, not just accepting it as an arrangement," Lena agreed, though the thought of standing up in front of people and declaring her commitment to Jake felt more terrifying than their courthouse wedding had been. This time, the words would matter. This time they would mean what they said. Carlos offered to help Jake build a simple altar in the backyard, under the oak tree that had already become the symbol of their future together. Mrs. Patterson, who had become something like a grandmother figure to Tommy, volunteered to make a cake and coordinate the simple reception. "What should I wear?" Tommy asked, taking his role as ring-bearer seriously. "Can Captain Thunder come to the wedding?" "You should wear whatever makes you feel handsome and important," Lena said. "And Captain Thunder can definitely come. He's part of the family too." The night before the closing, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Jake. They'd finally moved past the pull-out couch arrangement after deciding to buy the house together, and listened to his steady breathing. While her mind raced through all the ways their new life could unfold. In 12 hours, they would own a house together. In 2 weeks, they would renew their vows and invite their community to witness their commitment. Tommy would have his own room, his own yard, the stability of a real home that couldn't be taken away by late rent payments or landlord decisions. But underneath the excitement was a thread of anxiety that Lena couldn't quite identify. Not regret exactly, but something like the vertigo that comes from standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down at a landscape you'd only imagined before. "Can't sleep?" Jake's voice was quiet in the darkness. "Too much to think about. Good thoughts or worried thoughts?" "Both." "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Jake turned to face her, and she could see his eyes reflecting the streetlight that filtered through their bedroom curtains.
Terrified.
But the good kind of terrified, like before a roller coaster you really want to ride. What if we're making a mistake? What if we're not ready for this much commitment? Then we'll figure it out as we go, same as we've been doing. Lena, 6 months ago, we were strangers, sitting on a bus stop bench. Now we're about to buy a house together and raise a child together and build a life that neither of us could have imagined on our own. If we can do that, we can handle whatever comes next. Lena thought about the woman she'd been that morning at the bus stop, desperate, alone, running out of options and hope. That woman would never have believed that she'd find herself here, in a warm bed next to a good man, planning a future that felt both practical and magical. Do you think Tommy will be happy in the new house? I think Tommy will be happy anywhere he feels secure and loved. And he'll have both of those things. What about you? Will you be happy? Jake was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of certainty that surprised her. I'm already happy, Lena. Happier than I've been since before Sarah left. Maybe happier than I've ever been. The house is just going to give us more space to be happy in. The closing went smoothly, a series of signatures and handshakes that transformed them from renters to homeowners in the space of an hour. When Margaret handed them the keys, Tommy cheered so loudly that everyone in the title company office turned to smile at his enthusiasm. Can we go see our house now? He asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. It's your house now, Margaret said, addressing Tommy directly. You can go see it whenever you want. They drove to the house in Jake's truck. Tommy chattering non-stop about all the things he wanted to do first. Check on the oak tree, measure his new bedroom, start planning the optimal placement for his toys. When they pulled into the driveway of 847 Maple Street, Lena felt a surge of pride and disbelief. This was their house, their home, the place where Tommy would grow up, where she and Jake would continue building their unlikely partnership into something even stronger. Jake pulled a small wrapped box from his pocket as they stood on the front porch, keys in hand. What's this? Lena asked. Early Christmas present. Open it. Inside the box was a simple keychain, a small silver house with their address engraved on one side, and home is where the heart is on the other. I know it's cheesy, Jake said, but I wanted you to have something to remember this moment. Lena fastened the keychain to the house keys, feeling the weight of the metal warm in her palm. It's perfect. They opened the front door together, all three of them crossing the threshold at the same time into the empty rooms that would soon be filled with their furniture. Their daily routines, their shared life. Welcome home, Jake said, and kissed her in the doorway of their new house while Tommy ran ahead to claim his bedroom and begin the serious business of planning his new life-moving day arrived with the chaos that comes from trying to relocate an entire life in the space of a weekend. Beth and her family had driven down from Oregon as promised, bringing a U-Haul truck and the kind of organizational energy that came from years of managing teenage schedules and family logistics. This is really happening, Beth said, standing in the middle of their old apartment as Jake and Mark carried the last of the boxes down to the truck. 6 months ago, I was worried about you living alone in grief. And now you're moving into a house with a husband and stepson. Strange how life works out, Lena agreed, taking one last look around the small space that had been her first home as Mrs. Morrison. The apartment felt smaller than ever, with all their belongings removed. But it also felt like a cocoon they'd outgrown, rather than a place they were abandoning. Tommy had insisted on carrying Captain Thunder personally, refusing to pack the action figure in any box where he might get lost or damaged. He supervised the move with the seriousness of a general directing troops, making sure everyone understood which boxes contained very important stuff and which ones could be handled with normal care. The box with my books has to go in my new room first, he informed Mark, who had been designated as Tommy's personal moving assistant. And the one with my art supplies, and the one with my special rocks. How many special rocks does a 7-year-old need? Mark asked Lena in an undertone. More than you'd think. Tommy's a collector. The new house felt enormous after months in the small apartment. Their furniture, which had filled every corner of their previous home, looked lost in the larger rooms, creating islands of familiarity in the vast space they now owned. But Tommy adapted with the resilience of childhood, immediately claiming his bedroom and beginning the important work of deciding where everything should go. His bed looked small in the center of the room, surrounded by boxes and possibility. I can fit my whole collection in here, he announced, surveying his new domain with satisfaction. And there's space for when I get bigger furniture. Lena unpacked the kitchen while Jake and the others focused on the larger furniture, finding a strange comfort in the routine of organizing dishes and arranging pantry items. Each cabinet she filled, each drawer she organized, felt like another step in claiming this space as theirs. When she opened the box containing David's cookbook, she held it for a long moment, remembering the last time she'd used it to make dinner in their old kitchen, when David was still alive, to taste her cooking and offer suggestions for improvement. "You okay?" Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair dusty from moving boxes and his shirt wrinkled from the day's work. "Just thinking about transitions," Lena said, placing the cookbook on the shelf between her other cooking references. "About how we carry the past with us when we move into new places. Is that a good thing or a hard thing?" "Both, but mostly good." That evening, after Beth's family had driven back to their hotel and the three of them sat in their new living room eating pizza off paper plates, Tommy made an announcement that caught both adults by surprise. "I want to change my name," he said, picking pepperoni off his slice with the careful attention he brought to all important decisions. "Change it how?" Jake asked. "I want my last name to be Morrison Walsh, like how some kids at school have two names from both their parents." Lena felt her breath catch. "Tommy, you don't have to do that. I'm your stepmother, not your biological mother. But you're my real mother now," Tommy said, with the matter-of-fact logic of childhood. "Not the one who had me, but the one who takes care of me and helps with homework and fixes my toys when they break." Sarah was just the one who left. Jake and Lena exchanged a look across the coffee table, both recognizing the significance of what Tommy was offering and what it meant for their family's identity. "That's a big decision," Jake said carefully. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure. We're a real family now, and real families have names that match." 2 days later, they met with a lawyer to begin the paperwork for Tommy's name change and for Lena's formal adoption of him. The legal process would take months, but the emotional reality was already complete. They were no longer an arrangement of convenience, but a family by choice and commitment. The week before their vow renewal ceremony, Lena found herself standing in their new bedroom, trying on the dress she'd bought for the occasion. It was simple but elegant, cream-colored rather than white, appropriate for a woman renewing vows rather than taking them for the first time. In the mirror, she looked like someone she was still getting to know, not the grieving widow who'd sat on the bus stop bench, but not quite the confident wife she was still becoming. Somewhere in between, maybe. Someone who was learning that identity could be fluid, that you could honor your past while building something entirely new. Jake appeared in the bedroom doorway, wearing the navy suit he'd bought for the occasion. He looked handsome and slightly nervous, like a man preparing for something that mattered more than he'd expected. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the wonder of someone who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "You clean up pretty well yourself. Are you ready for this?" "Really ready." Lena turned from the mirror to face him directly. "I'm ready to promise to love you and Tommy and this life we're building together. I'm ready to stop thinking of this as temporary and start thinking of it as permanent. I'm ready to be your wife in every way that matters, even though we didn't start with love. Especially because we didn't start with love. What we have is something we built together, something we chose together. That feels more solid to me than passion that might fade." Jake crossed the room and took her hands, the same gesture he'd made when they'd shaken hands on their original arrangement. But now it carried the weight of everything they'd learned about each other. "Tomorrow, I'm going to promise to love you for the rest of my life," he said. "And I want you to know that I mean it. Not because I have to, not because it's practical, but because you've become the most important person in my world besides Tommy." Jake, "I love your organizational systems and your patience with Tommy's questions and the way you hum when you're cooking. I love that you fix Captain Thunder and that you always remember to buy the orange juice Tommy likes. I love that you made us feel like a real family before I even knew that's what I was looking for." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen and valued by someone who knew all her ordinary. Daily self and loved her anyway. I love you too, she said. The words feeling both new and inevitable. I love your steadiness and your devotion to Tommy, and the way you've never once made me feel like I was settling for less than I deserved. I love that you saw something worth choosing in a broken woman at a bus stop. They held each other in their new bedroom, in their new house, surrounded by the life they'd built from desperation and hope and daily acts of kindness. Tomorrow, they would stand under the oak tree and make promises in front of their friends and family. But tonight, they were already home. The December morning of their vow renewal dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of bright winter sunshine that made everything look clean and full of possibility. Lena woke early in their shared bedroom, listening to Jake's steady breathing and the sounds of their house settling around them, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through the oak tree, the distant hum of the refrigerator in their kitchen. Their kitchen, their house, their life. By 8 o'clock, the house was buzzing with activity. Beth had arrived early to help with final preparations, bringing flowers from the grocery store and a determination to make everything perfect. Carlos had come over to help Jake set up chairs in the backyard and ensure the makeshift altar looked appropriately ceremonial. I still can't believe you two are doing this in December, Beth said, arranging white roses in mason jars while Lena put the finishing touches on her makeup. It's going to be freezing out there. It's symbolic, Lena said. We're renewing our vows in the season when everything looks dead, but is actually just dormant, preparing for new growth. That's very poetic. Also very cold. Tommy appeared in the bedroom doorway wearing his best khaki pants and a button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed and Captain Thunder tucked securely in his jacket pocket. Do I look good enough for a wedding? He asked, spinning around to show off his outfit. You look perfect, Lena said, kneeling down to adjust his collar. Are you ready to be our ring bearer? I've been practicing. Watch. Tommy carefully pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and demonstrated his planned walk down the aisle, taking measured steps and holding the box with ceremonial importance. Excellent technique, Jake said, appearing behind Tommy in his navy suit and tie. Very professional. Are you nervous, Dad? A little. Good nervous, though. Like before a birthday party or Christmas morning. By 11 o'clock, their small gathering of witnesses had assembled in the backyard. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and a proud smile. Margaret Chen, their realtor, had come to see the house she'd helped them find, transformed into a home. A few of Jake's co-workers from the construction site formed a supportive cluster near the back. Good-natured men who'd watched their friend's transformation from stressed single father to content family man. The officiant was a local minister that Mrs. Patterson had recommended, a woman in her 50s who specialized in non-traditional ceremonies and understood that love came in many forms. Are you ready? Jake asked, finding Lena in the kitchen where she was taking deep breaths and trying to calm her sudden attack of nerves. I think so. This feels bigger than our courthouse wedding, because this time we mean it, because this time people are watching us mean it. Jake took her hands, his thumb rubbing gently across the simple gold band she'd worn for the past 6 months. We don't have to prove anything to anybody out there. We just have to tell each other the truth about what we want. They walked out to the backyard together, Jake's hand warm and steady in hers. The oak tree had been decorated with white lights and ribbons, creating a canopy of celebration against the winter sky. Their friends and family stood as they approached, but Lena barely noticed anyone except Tommy, who stood at the altar with the rings and the biggest smile she'd ever seen on his face. Dearly beloved, the minister began, we are gathered here today to witness Jake and Lena as they renew their commitment to each other and to the family they have chosen to create together. The words were familiar from countless weddings, but spoken here in their backyard. In front of the tree Tommy had claimed for his future treehouse, they felt entirely new. This wasn't a ceremony about romantic ideals or fairy tale promises. This was about the love that grew from showing up every day. from choosing to care for each other through ordinary moments and unexpected challenges. Jake and Lena have written their own vows, the minister continued. Jake, would you like to begin? Jake pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, then looked at it and put it away again. I wrote down what I wanted to say, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the small gathering. But now that I'm standing here, I realize I don't need notes to tell you what you mean to me. He turned to face Lena fully, his hands finding hers again. 6 months ago, I was a man who thought he had to do everything alone. I thought asking for help was the same as admitting failure. I thought love was something that happened to other people who had more time and energy and emotional capacity than I did. His voice was steady but emotional, and Lena could see tears in his eyes. You taught me that love isn't something you fall into by accident. It's something you build on purpose, one day at a time, one kind gesture at a time, one shared responsibility at a time. You taught me that the strongest families aren't born. They're chosen. He paused, looking over at Tommy, who was listening with the rapt attention he brought to all important adult conversations. You took us as we were, a father who was doing his best but struggling, a little boy who needed more stability than I could provide on my own, and you made us better. Not by changing us, but by loving us exactly as we were and helping us become the family we were meant to be. Lena felt tears streaming down her cheeks, not caring about her carefully applied makeup. So today I promise you this: I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. I will show up for our family. I will work to deserve the love you've given us. And I will never take for granted the gift of being loved by someone as remarkable as you. The minister turned to Lena. Lena had also prepared written vows, but like Jake, she found herself speaking from her heart instead of her notes. A year ago, if someone had told me I would be standing in my own backyard, married to a man I met at a bus stop, promising to love a child who calls me Mom, I would have thought they were describing someone else's life. She smiled through her tears, looking at the faces gathered around them, this unexpected community that had welcomed her and helped her heal. I came into this marriage because I needed saving. But what I learned is that salvation isn't something that happens to you. It's something you participate in. You saved me, Jake, but not by rescuing me. You saved me by giving me the chance to save myself, by showing me that I was strong enough to build a new life and wise enough to choose love over fear. She looked down at Tommy, whose serious expression told her he understood that something important was happening, even if he couldn't articulate exactly what. Tommy, you saved me too, by teaching me that being a mother isn't about biology. It's about choosing to show up every day and love someone enough to help them grow into their best self. She turned back to Jake, her voice growing stronger with each word. So I promise you both this: I will be your family by choice every single day. I will love you not because I have to, but because I get to. I will work to deserve the trust you've placed in me, and I will never forget that the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin with two people deciding to build something together. The ring exchange was simple but meaningful. They had chosen new bands to mark this new beginning, simple white gold circles that would complement rather than replace the ones they'd worn for 6 months, when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Again, Jake's kiss was different from their courthouse wedding. This time it was full of promise and certainty, the kiss of a man who knew exactly what he was choosing and why. Tommy cheered so loudly that everyone laughed, and then suddenly everyone was hugging and crying and celebrating, and Lena found herself at the center of a circle of love that she had never expected to find, but had somehow helped create. 6 months after their vow renewal, on a warm June evening, Lena stood at the kitchen window of 847 Maple Street, watching Jake and Tommy work together on the treehouse they'd been planning since the day they first saw the oak tree. The project had taken longer than expected, weekends interrupted by rain, baseball practice, and the ordinary demands of family life. But now it was nearly complete. A sturdy platform nestled in the broad branches, with walls taking shape around it. "Hand me that hammer, buddy," Jake called down to Tommy, who was serving as chief tool supplier and quality control inspector from his position on the ground. This one or the bigger one? The bigger one. We want to make sure Captain Thunder's fortress can withstand any attack. Lena smiled as she listened to their easy collaboration. Tommy had grown 3 inches since they'd moved into the house, and his confidence had grown even more. His most recent report card showed steady improvement in all subjects, but more importantly, his teacher reported that he seemed genuinely happy at school. The kind of settled contentment that came from knowing he had a stable home to return to every afternoon. The welcome home doormat that Lena had placed by their front door after they'd moved in had become somewhat prophetic. The house had transformed from an empty space into a true home, filled with the accumulated debris of daily life. Tommy's art projects on the refrigerator, Jake's work boots by the back door, Lena's accounting files organized in neat stacks on the dining room table, Captain Thunder's various adventures scattered throughout every room. The guest room had been converted into Lena's office, where she'd built a small but successful freelance accounting practice working with local small businesses. She enjoyed the flexibility of working from home, being available when Tommy got off the school bus, and contributing financially to their household in a way that felt balanced and sustainable. But perhaps the most significant change was the master bedroom, which had evolved from a practical sleeping arrangement into a space that truly belonged to both of them. David's photograph had been moved to a place of honor on Lena's desk, no longer a nightly reminder of loss, but a cherished memory of love that had helped prepare her for the different but equally valuable love she'd found with Jake. "Lena," Tommy's voice called from the backyard. "Come see how high we are." She dried her hands on the kitchen towel and went outside to admire their progress. The treehouse was 8 feet off the ground, accessible by a ladder Jake had built with the same careful attention to safety that he brought to all his construction projects. "It's impressive," she said, shading her eyes to look up at them. "Definitely worthy of Captain Thunder's adventures. Want to come up and see the view?" Jake asked, his face flushed with the satisfaction of work well done. Lena climbed the ladder carefully, grateful for Jake's steadying hand as she stepped onto the platform. From their elevated position, she could see into several neighbors' yards, where other families were spending their evening hours, children playing on swing sets, couples tending gardens, teenagers shooting basketballs at garage-mounted hoops. "We can see everything from up here," Tommy said proudly. "This is going to be the best place for watching out for bad guys and planning important missions." "Very strategic," Lena agreed. "You've chosen the perfect location." Jake put his arm around her waist as they stood on the platform, and she leaned into his solid warmth. 6 months of sharing a bed, a bathroom, and the intimate details of daily life had created the kind of physical ease between them that she thought she might never experience again. Not the passionate intensity of new romance, but something deeper and more sustaining. The comfort of belonging to someone who knew all your habits and loved you anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked quietly while Tommy climbed down to retrieve a toy he'd forgotten. "How strange it is that the best things in life sometimes come disguised as desperate decisions. Any regrets?" Lena looked around their backyard, at the vegetable garden she'd planted in the spring, at the swing Jake had hung from another branch of the oak tree, at the patio furniture where they ate dinner on warm evenings, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life that had grown organically from practical beginnings into something rich and meaningful. "None. You? Only that it took us so long to find each other. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. Any earlier and we wouldn't have been ready for this." That evening, after Tommy had been tucked into his own bed in his own room with Captain Thunder standing guard on the nightstand, Jake and Lena sat on their back porch with glasses of wine and the comfortable silence of people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with conversation. "Beth called today," Lena said eventually. "She and Mark are planning to visit next month. She wants to see the treehouse and meet Tommy's Little League team. She's finally convinced that you made the right decision. I think she's convinced that I'm happy." "That's what she was really worried about," Jake reached over and took her hand, their wedding rings catching the light from the porch lamp. They'd kept their original courthouse bands, as well as the ones from their vow renewal, wearing them stacked together as a reminder of their journey from strangers to partners to genuine family. "Are you happy?" he asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "Happier than I thought possible after David died. Different happy than I was before, but real happy. Deep happy. Good different or just different?" Lena considered this carefully. Good different. What David and I had was beautiful, but it was built on shared dreams and romantic love, and the kind of optimism that comes from being young and thinking you can control how your story ends. She squeezed Jake's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and reliability. What we have is built on something more solid. We've both been tested by loss and disappointment, and we chose each other anyway. We know that life doesn't always go according to plan, but we also know that we can handle whatever comes next, because we've already proven we can build something good from difficult circumstances. So you think we're going to make it? Long term? I think we're going to make it exactly as long as we keep choosing each other every day. And I can't imagine a day when I wouldn't choose this life, this family, this man who saw possibility in a desperate woman at a bus stop. Jake lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that had become one of his ways of showing affection without words. 29.5 years left on that mortgage, he said with a smile. 29.5 years of building something, together. From his bedroom window, they could hear Tommy talking quietly to Captain Thunder, probably planning the next day's adventures in the new treehouse. It was the sound of a child who felt safe enough to dream out loud, secure in the knowledge that the adults in his life would be there when he woke up. As they sat in the gathering darkness, Lena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a woman whose life had been reduced to a pile of unpayable bills and a future she couldn't imagine. Jake had been a father stretched to his breaking point, trying to provide stability he couldn't afford for a child who deserved better than constant uncertainty. Now they were a family, not the kind that appeared in fairy tales or romance novels, but the kind that existed in real life, built on daily kindness, mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the gradual accumulation of ordinary moments that added up to love. The bus stop where they'd met was 15 minutes away by car, but it felt like a different lifetime. Sometimes Lena drove past it on her way to grocery shopping or errands, and she would remember the woman who'd sat there clutching eviction notices and trying to summon the courage to sell her wedding ring. That woman had been brave enough to listen to an impossible proposition from a stranger, smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it presented itself, and wise enough to understand that sometimes the most practical decisions were also the most romantic ones. As Jake stood up and offered her his hand to go inside, their house, their home, their life together, Lena smiled at the simple perfection of it all. They had needed each other, so they had found each other. They had chosen each other, so they had built something lasting together. It wasn't complicated or dramatic or the stuff of epic love stories. It was just real, and real, it turned out, was exactly what she'd been looking for all along. The welcome mat by their front door caught the porch light as they went inside. Its simple message somehow containing the entire story of how two strangers had become a family. Welcome home.